Hey guys, my name is Haley and today I'm going to be filming my July wrap-up. Spoiler alert, I read a ton of manga, so I am not going to throw up every single volume of manga that I've read because it was a lot and I read like two decently long series. So I am just going to throw up the first volume of that and just talk about the series as a whole because I read them very quickly. I don't remember specifics because manga goes really fast, but I'm going to jump into this. I think I read like 35 books, including all of the manga, so we might be here for a while. My first manga series that I read was Comey, Can't Communicate. I read volumes 1 through 7, and I believe my favorite was volume 1, possibly volume 2 or 3. I gave all of these like a 4 to 4.5 stars, I think. I think there was one I gave like a 3.75. But I really love this. It's super cute. It's just about a girl who has a social disorder where she doesn't know how to speak to people, and she's so adorable. Her friends are really cute and I loved it. I flew through this series so quickly when I read them at Kate's house. By the way, all this manga I read at Kate's house, like on the lake, so that's why I don't have any of them to hold up. And then next up, I read the next volume in the I Hear the Sunspot series, which I read the 2 standalone mangas, and then there's a started series off of that. So this is volume 2 of the actual series. I think it's called Limit 2, and this was pretty good. I think I gave it 4 stars. There was a big miscommunication trope, which is not my favorite, between the 2 main characters. So that was mildly frustrating because it was just very much like, oh, you don't understand. And I'm like, if y'all would talk to each other, maybe we would be able to try and understand. So just there was a lot of miscommunication in that they wouldn't speak, which was kind of annoying. But I am going to continue with this series. I really like these characters. I'll see if it gets any better with the later volumes because so far I've loved the standalones way more than the actual series. And then I also read all of the volumes Kate has of Beastars. This is a series that is all animals, and it's not as creepy and furry as it sounds. It's very much talking about social issues. And there's like a hierarchy of like the carnivores and the herbivores in this society, and they're all like in school. It's like set around a drama club, which I really love. I think it's really cute. If you didn't know, I'm a theater person. I used to perform in theater all the time for like 6 or 7 years of my life. So anything based around a theater troupe, I'm very interested in. And I love the topics that this discusses. I really like the rabbit, who is one of the main characters. I like our main character, who is a wolf. And I also really like the deer character. They're all very interesting and like very, I guess one of them would be considered morally gray, but I really enjoyed this series. I do plan to catch up on like Comey and Beastars probably the next time I visit Kate. Like that's just my thing. I read all of her manga because I don't buy manga because it's too expensive and my libraries don't have it. So I really enjoyed this series. I think I gave all of them like a 3.75 to a 4.5 as well. And then going a little bit out of order here, these ones I actually own, but Kate gave them to me. I read the first 2 volumes of Your Lie in April. This is a series about 2 musicians, and I actually really like these. I gave these both like a solid 4 stars, and I own the first 4 volumes, I believe. So I think there are 11. I'm probably gonna try and look for them on thrift books for like really cheap. If not, I'm not sure how I'm going to continue the series because, again, I don't really buy manga. I only have these because Kate gave them to me because she didn't want to continue with the series, but I enjoyed these. I really like the female character in this. She's very interesting and, like, very abrasive, which I find very different from a lot of female manga characters. That might be a generalization. If it is, I'm sorry. I don't read that much manga, but I do try to read it when I can, and I'm definitely going to continue with this series. I read these 2 for the reading rush, which my reading rush TBR is just going to be scattered throughout this. If you want to know what my actual TBR for that readathon was, I will leave my vlog linked down below to watch. And then I read 3 of Junji Ito's horror mangas, which are like thicker. One of them was like 500 pages. I think the other were like close to 400 each. The first one I read was Uzumaki, which I wanted to read for a really long time actually, and have almost bought myself because it's a horror. Like Junji Ito is known for his horror manga. And this one is about a town that becomes obsessed with spirals, and then like it slowly starts to drive the town insane. And I actually really like this. The first like 200 to 300 pages were really interesting and really fast-paced and creepy. And then like the middle chunk was a little bit tedious to get through because it was kind of repetitive. And then I also enjoyed the ending. So I gave this about a 4.25 stars. I really liked it. It was like almost 4.5, but not quite. And then I read another one of his, which is called Gyo, and all you need to know about this is Spiderfish. And that's all I'm gonna say. This was fine. It was just another one of those, of course there's a spiderfish, of course there's a spider shark, over and over and over for like 300 some pages. So I gave this a 3 stars. It was fine. It's probably more like a 2.75. It was not nearly as creepy as the others. The one thing I will say about this one is I kept making the joke. I was like, you know, in this pandemic, if somebody were to tell me that spiderfish came out of the ocean in Japan, I would just believe them at this point of all the other crazy things going on in our world right now. So it was fine. If that sounds interesting, check it out. And then the last manga thing that I read was the horror short story collection called Shiver. And I gave this like a 3.5 stars. There was like one story that I like genuinely hated. There were like 2 that were just boring. And then my favorite was one called The Longest Dream. And that was a 5 out of 5 stars. So like I like evened it out of all of my ratings for each story, and it came about to a 3.5, which is really average for a short story collection. So I read that as well. And then I read 2 like novella short story length things, which I read The Dawn Chorus, which is the novella to the Bone Season series, which if you have seen my previous videos from this year, I'm obsessed with this series and I can't wait for the next book to come out, but it doesn't come out till like January of next year, I think is what it's slated for, which is just too long from now. So I have been reading the novellas for the series. There's another one called The Pale Dreamer, and this one is literally just Paige and Warden, who are my favorite characters, and I loved it. I read it on my Kindle. I bought it off of Amazon for my Kindle, and I loved it. Exactly what I needed to tide me over to the next book. Then I listened to a little short story called The Yellow Wallpaper, which is for free on YouTube. It's like half an hour long, and I listened to it at 2 times speed, so it took 0 time to listen to, really. And it's about this woman who is locked in a room with some crazy looking wallpaper, and her husband has locked her there because he thinks something is wrong with her and that she has some sort of mental illness. And it's also set in earlier times, like I want to assume the 1800s, when they didn't know much about mental illness. And I thought it was fine. I've heard a lot of people rave about how good this is, and I just kind of thought it was fine. I gave it 3 stars. I didn't really get the ending. I even like looked up a bunch of stuff on the internet about theories and things for it, and I still don't quite think I enjoyed it by any means. It wasn't that creepy. I expected it to be creepier, I think, was the main problem with it. And then over the course of while Kate was here and slightly before and after, I read all of the Will Macintosh that I bought. So I'm going to talk about these real quick. The first one, technically the first one that I read, was Soft Apocalypse. This I actually DNF'd. It was the first one I tried to read, and I got about halfway through it and DNF'd it. And then I came to a theory that I think his books might be like somewhat related. Sorry if I'm like standing off to the side, it's because I need to put these up here. And also there's a glare on my glasses and a shadow if I try and stand in the middle because their lighting is weird outside. So I'm just gonna stand over here. But I read the first half of this and really didn't like it and DNF'd it because it was kind of boring, and the main character is so obnoxious. Like, he's so annoying. He's literally in an apocalypse, and all he's worried about is getting a girlfriend, and I can't stand him. I'm like, what are you doing? What is wrong with you? Why are you like this? And then I ended up going back and reading the second half of it after I read a couple of other of Will Macintosh's books and loved them, because I have a small theory that his books might be related in some way, but I don't know how. Again, the more of his books that I've read, I still can't tell if that's the case, so don't quote me on that. I think he just might be obsessed with writing apocalypses, but I finished this and gave it like a 2 stars because, again, this main character is the worst. And then the second of his that I picked up was Hitchers. I loved this one. This one and another one might be tied for my favorite of all of his books that I read. And this is about a world in an apocalypse where people start getting voices that come out of their throats of things they didn't say and they don't know why. And that's all I'm going to say about it. As you can see, the cover is so cool. I love this cover so much, and I gave this 4.5 stars. I really liked our main characters in this, and I really liked the type of apocalypse it was because I've never seen anything like it in my life, and I thought it was so interesting and fast-paced, and I flew through this in like a day and a half while Kate was here, so we were actually talking and doing stuff too, so that's how I know how much I enjoyed it, because I actually finished it. And then I read and finished also very quickly Love Minus 80. You can't even see that on this cover. I think this might be an ARC copy because it does not look like the finished cover on Goodreads. So Thrift Books is selling me ARC copies, but I loved this as well. I found this world the most interesting. It's like set farther in the future, and there's a lot of lot more sci-fi to this one, about like the way the world has turned out. If there was this technology in which people could die and then they turn it into a dating service almost of females that die, if they're pretty, they will be put on ice and saved for like hundreds of years in the future. And like the authorities have like made a dating service out of it called Bridesicles, and like they'll bring the dead brides back to life to talk to men who like can pay to get them out. So basically rich men can pay to have a bridesicle, and it's so messed up. And there's also a lot more going on in this world than just that. There's like several different perspectives, and I found all of the perspectives really interesting, so I love this. I gave this 4.5 stars as well. And then on the train ride home, I read Defenders. This is also an apocalypse, like all of his novels apparently. And this is more about an alien invasion in which we create a race of creatures called Defenders to protect us and help us win the war with the aliens. And my biggest issue with this one was that the aliens, for one, were kind of weird. I'm not going to say what they are because I feel like it's kind of a spoiler. The aliens themselves were very strange. Like, the type of creature that they were, I was like, why did you choose this creature? That's not that intimidating. Although I did like the way they communicated. They're very telepathic, which made it creepier, to be completely honest. And then the race they created to defend against these aliens that the human race created, they basically tried to make superhumans, and it turns out that it might have not have been the best idea, because what happens when you like win the war and still have these creatures, basically. I did like parts of this. This one is much more military focused than his other books, so that was not my favorite. Probably because I didn't care as much about like the creatures they created as a species, even though what they did with them was very interesting. But I gave this at 3.5 stars. It is the thickest of his books and did take me a little bit longer to read, but I did enjoy it. And then I just finished Faller by Will McIntosh, and I liked this one a lot. The beginning of this is probably my favorite of his like first scenes. Like, you get dropped into this world and you have no idea what's going on, and it works because the main character also has no idea what's going on, and the way things are described is so like hard to wrap your mind around, and I found that fascinating. I read this in the last like 24 hours and I really enjoyed it. I liked our main character. His name is Faller. And this one is probably the most sci-fi, like hardcore sci-fi compared to the rest of them, like scientific wise, because as you start to unravel what happened and how the world ended up like this, it's a lot to wrap your mind around. Like, this feels like it would be a very, very fun sci-fi movie. I will say that. I gave this a 4.25 stars. I didn't like it quite as much as Hitchers and Love Minus 80, but I really, really thought this was a solid sci-fi novel. And then I quickly listened to the audiobook when it came in, because I've been waiting on this for like 6 months on audio, and it took forever to come in, and it came in while I was at Kate's, and I was like, I'm sorry, we have to make time for audios because I cannot wait on this book. I'm not sending it back. I've been waiting for like 6 months, and that is Small Favor, which is book 10 in the Dresden Files. I was so happy to be back in the Dresden Files world. I love Harry Dresden so much. I also love his best friend Michael so much, and I think these are really fun. Like, they're very easy reads. I love the audiobook narrator, and I talked a little bit about this in one of my vlogs when I was reading it, but I love the faith in this series, which you think wouldn't be a thing in a urban fantasy setting. Like, I feel like urban fantasy and other types of series especially tend to like not do well dealing with religion or dock it or whatever, or make fun of it. And this series actually uses Christianity in a way that, especially the further the series goes on, in a way that faith is like a power, like compared to like the magic powers that Dresden has. And I find it fascinating. I love the way it's discussed. Like, Dresden's best friend is a very devout Catholic, and I love his character. I love the way they handle Harry Dresden's like almost faith journey throughout this. Like, he's not being converted by any means, but he's definitely fascinated in the idea of it, which I really enjoy watching and like seeing play out in this series. It's probably my favorite thing about the series besides Harry himself, because he's sarcastic and great. But I gave this a solid 4 stars, and I'm super excited to continue with this series. I think I have like 5 more. There's like 15 books in this series. I think another one just came out, so I'm trying to catch up as the audios become available. They just take forever to come in sometimes. Then I very spontaneously listened to Britt Marie Was Here by Frederick Bachman, and I actually really love this. I was like trying out a bunch of audios to try and get another book read like this week before I filmed my wrap up, and like I just accidentally listened to this whole audiobook in like about 24 hours. And it was mainly because I love Britt Marie. She's such an interesting old lady, and being in her head was fascinating. I loved her so much. I loved her like journey throughout the book of like getting to and coming to know herself. I loved her past and the reason she was like trying to make a new life, and this was so much fun. It was about like soccer. Well, they called it football. I'm pretty sure it was soccer because I'm pretty sure it was set in England or somewhere in Europe, so that would be soccer. But she basically ends up in a middle of nowhere town, is like, I want a job, and they were like, you're an old lady, why do you need a job when you've never had a job? And she was like, no, I want a job. And I found it just very endearing, and I loved her so much. I gave this a 4.25 stars, and I'm very excited to like get back on Frederick Bachman's books. I've read all but I think one right now. I think the only one I have left is My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry. And then I think he has a new book coming out relatively soon. So Frederick Bachman is actually one of my favorite authors. He wrote Beartown, which I adored and read last year, and the sequel. And apparently there's going to be a third book to that series, and nobody told me. And I was like, I'm so excited. I love his writing. I love the morals of his books. And this one was no different from the rest. Sorry for the interruption. Here's editing Haley realizing that I forgot to even talk about one of my favorite books of the month because there were too many books to talk about, and like it was out of order on my notes. So I forgot to talk about Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which I also read at Kate's and absolutely loved. It is about a town where this older woman keeps claiming that there are deer taking revenge on the town, and that there are murderous deer that are like doing all of these crazy creepy things in town and killing people. And I loved it. I loved being in this main character's head, and I'm probably gonna buy myself a copy. So I don't know how I forgot to talk about it, but here's me talking about it because I did not have the energy to set up my whole thing again. So you're getting a vlog clip. I apologize. Back to your regularly scheduled programming. I then unexpectedly picked up Burn Our Bodies Down, and actually have since bought myself this copy because I borrowed Kate's while I was on vacation and read it in like 2 sittings. I like read it, half of it on the beach and then the other half the next day when we were sitting in the house sunburnt while watching Infinite. So I actually really love this, and it was for a very random reason that I feel like nobody else even like noticed with this book, and that's because there were like a ton of biblical allusions if you knew to look for them. And it put me down a whole rabbit hole of I might actually do a separate review of this book because I was fascinated by the fact that nobody knew what I was talking about when I was explaining. Like I was talking to Kate out loud as things were happening. I was like, wait a minute, do you know this is a biblical thing? Like I think this is a Cain and Abel retelling. I don't know if Rory Power did that on purpose. I did read her other book and thought it was fine, but I loved this one for the twist towards the end, and I can't even tell you what this is about or how to explain that without like spoiling it, so I think I'm just going to do a spoiler review as I talk about it. Hopefully I will be filming that sometime soon, but I adored this. I gave this 4.5 stars, mainly because the middle was a little confusing. There was a lot of gaslighting going on in this, so if you don't like gaslighting or like that is a sensitive topic for you, be careful, because it happens a lot in this because of the mystery. But this surprised me probably more than anything that I've read this month, so I'm definitely planning on taking a bunch of notes down to talk about this in hopefully a coherent way. I then read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which is a time-traveling coffee shop, basically, in which there's a coffee shop where people like have heard that you can use it to time travel, and then a woman gets there and like finds out that the specifics around the time travel are so specific that it's almost not worth it. And then this is almost a short story collection, which I found interesting because I didn't know that going in, but I thought that the characters in this were fascinating. Also, like, the time travel aspect was also really interesting, but the characters were what made the story so interesting, and like the ways they were connected to each other, and I loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars, which I went into this expecting to like it, but I was not sure if I was gonna love it, so that kind of surprised me a lot. This is Japanese lit, if you did not know, and I took this on recommendation of Kate because she reads a lot more Japanese fiction than I do. But this has definitely made me much more interested in checking out more Japanese lit. So if you have any suggestions, please leave some down in the comments below. Then last, and probably the most anticipated book of mine of the last year, is I read A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. If you were around like 2 years ago, my favorite book of the year was Hank's other book, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, and I actually met Hank and John at their book tour. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit upset that couldn't happen because of COVID this year, because he was definitely planning on doing it. Also, this book is much thicker than that first one, and I went into this kind of nervous because Kate didn't actually love it that much. And I was like, oh no, am I gonna hate it? But I think she didn't love it for the fact that this feels more like fantasy. Like, it has fantasy tropes. It is sci-fi, but it has fantasy tropes, and it's told from a bunch of different perspectives. I actually listened to it on audio because that's how I listened to his first book. And I listened to his first book in like 24 hours, and I did the exact same thing with this one. I think I listened to this in like exactly the 8 hours it took to get through the audiobook, but I ended up really liking this. Not so much, like, the story is not as interesting as the first one, as in the plot itself, but the social commentary on, like, human beings in this was what I really loved Hank's book for, and that was still present in this one. So I gave this 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I do want to go back and reread these physically and tab them up because I do love this series. I don't love this one as much as the first one, but if you're like put off by the size of it or like not great reviews, don't be hindered by that. I would say definitely go into it reading it and like form your own opinion on it, because again, I thought I wasn't gonna like it as much, but because Kate didn't, but I definitely did. Also, I got a signed copy from Hank, which is nice because my other one is signed because I met him as well. So now I have the matching set, and yeah. I don't know if this will be my favorite book of the year like his other book was, but I think it will definitely be on my favorites of the year because I did really enjoy it much more than I had anticipated after seeing other people's reactions to it. Then, as I have been doing with my wrap-ups the last couple of months, I'm just going to talk about a couple of books that I really had nothing to say about, but I also did read. So I read The Hate You Give. I gave this 4 stars. I listened to it on audio and like half read it, and it was really good. It's a very solid contemporary novel. It has a lot to say, and I did really enjoy it. I also read the libretto of Sweeney Todd. This is one of my favorite shows. I love this musical so much. So I was very happy to get a libretto of it and be able to read like stage directions and everything, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars for what it is. And then I listened to an audiobook of a horror novel called Seed by Anya Alborn, and did not like this. I gave it 2 stars. It's probably more like a 1.75, and it's because it uses the trope of evil children, which I hate. If you didn't know, I'm a nanny, so like just children are evil for the sake of the plot is just not a good enough excuse for me, so didn't like this. I might check out other Anya Alborn if they're not that same trope, because that's a very specific trope that I don't like in horror, so we'll see. It's everything I read in the month of July. It was a lot of stuff, a lot of manga, but I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what your favorite book of the month was down below in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.